All right. Just as a reminder, we have just started our recording. The meeting will be recorded and actually posted online. Just a reminder for that. Thank you. I got.
Thank you.
No worries.
It's nice to have
It was
extra
rough
stay
today.
in my hair.
I got
Which
caught
was
huge.
actually 6 years.
Good morning. Thank everybody for joining us and appreciate your patience stuff. Been a lot of work done for this task force. Everybody's banded together through the summer, both in person, online. We just have to adapt and overcome. And I think each time we get better and better with technology making all this work. So thank everybody for their patience as we work through this. What we're going to do is do a roll call of the members. And we'll have to acknowledge some are in person, some are online stuff, but we'll go through that. Senator Watson.
Here.
Grant Minshew. Thank you, sir.
Here.
Appreciate it. Judge Statham.
Here.
Thank you. Representative Hazelwood.
Here.
Thank you so much. Mr. Gleason. Thank you, sir. I'm here. David Connor. Mr. Connor, you with us, sir?
See him on there.
Ms. Nail.
There she is.
Thank you.
I'm here.
Appreciate it. All right. Obviously, we don't have enough in person for a quorum and stuff. We'll have to make some proper notes of that. I'm gonna turn over to Director Stroker here.
Yeah, so since we only have 4 in person and we need 5 technically to meet the requirements for open meetings, we just need to make note of it, that there is a necessity for us to meet and allow for it to be a quorum virtually. I would say that getting this task force done and the report out to the members in a timely manner by the end of the month constitutes a necessity. And so we're gonna go ahead and let that be noted that we do have a quorum with electronic means while there are only 4 in person. So if everyone agrees that there is a necessity for us to continue the meeting, we'll make note of that and let the appropriate authorities know. I think it's the Secretary of State's office will give notice to. But if everyone is fine with that, we'll continue forward. I'm seeing it not. Yeah, so
Yes.
there we
All
go.
right, great. Thank you. All right, so what I'd like to do is give everybody an opportunity to review the minutes from the April 9th, or correction, August 9th meeting. Give you some time to go through that. We're probably going to have to send that to Tim Massey, go those minutes. He can share it for the folks virtually. Virtual folks, if you will give us just a second, we'll get that email to you and we'll throw it up on the screen for y'all.
They're pretty, not very long minutes from the last meeting, but we'll get those to Lieutenant here in a second and put them up and get them emailed out to everyone.
Could be getting shared with you just momentarily. Oh, let's share that page.
Word document.
That should be the second to last one down there.
All the way at the bottom.
Yeah.
One more.
One more.
One more. There we go.
No, it was the second to last one.
Not the very bottom
One
one,
more.
up one more.
Here.
Elizabeth's gonna come down there and
Takes a village,
Stop
guys.
sharing.
Mouse is- All right, we have the minutes up on the screen there if everyone is comfortable with them.
Motion to approve the minutes. Second.
We have a motion second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Ayes have it. Thank you. Good deal. All right. Now if we work through the minutes and people had opportunity to review them, we can email those out to the group too. If people like to review them again afterwards, we can do that. But we've got the report and stuff. And what we want to do is present this report that we've drafted. And I want to thank everybody for their time they put into this and conversation and stuff. There's been a lot of thought that's been into this report. And I just want to thank everybody for it on the front side, but we'll get that up on the screen for people to start reviewing. Then if there's a discussion that we want to talk about it, we can do that as well. All right. It should be up on the screen now, and we will scroll through this slowly so you have an opportunity to read it.
Also sent it out on Friday, so everyone could have some time to look at it as well. And I only sent it to the task force members since it was a draft recommendation report. I didn't want to jump the gun on any of the members and send that to anyone else until you all were comfortable with it or made any changes that you may want to make. So that is at the discretion of the group on if they want to share this or if they want to wait until it's finalized and published to the General Assembly.
I would make a motion to share the draft report for those that requested. Just for transparency's sake.
First and second, any opposed? All in favor? Any opposed? We'll share it by request only.
We have members in the public here and one person's asked for it, so I have copies.
Great.
Distributed.
So this is Senator Watson. Can we talk about some of the stuff that's in the report, or are people still reading it?
Yeah, and I think everyone's probably looked at it since Friday, so this is really just now open discussion, Senator, for whatever item you all want to discuss. I can go through it by each recommendation if you want to do it that way, or we can jump into the ones that you all want to discuss. So it's totally informal and however you all want to take tackling this report.
Well,
Our
before
version of it, so.
getting into your action items, which are the 10 different considerations, if you go back up in the body of the report to the first paragraph, right there. So Public Chapter 1084 made some specific data requests that I think should be included in the report, and your bullet points highlight some of those data requests, like the number of ignition interlock devices and electronic monitoring devices currently covered. That's a specific number and request that should be included in the report. The current volume of monthly claims, that's just a data point that should be included in the report because the public chapter asks for that kind of information. So all of these things in these bullet points that are essentially supporting data for any of the considerations that the task force might put together, I think need to be included as information in the report for members and others who might look at the report. And because the statute asks us to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I was gonna leave that up to y'all since it said this is what you were tasked with reviewing. So didn't want to jump the gun and throw any of that in there. So more than happy to include that. I think we have most all of this anyways from the first meeting. So I'll go ahead and start adding that in while y'all discuss everything else. But yeah, good call. If no one is opposed to it, I'll go ahead and start working on putting that information in.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, well, I guess I'll keep talking. If you'll scroll down and we can kind of start taking up the considerations in the last the 10 bullet points.
And could I ask, sorry, this is Patsy, could we just go through them 1 through 10? Because different people might have different ideas, and I think it'll be easier for me if we're just going chronologically through the list.
Yeah, so we'll start with number 1, since this seemed to be the biggest talking point for everybody. So this is consider amending the definition of indigency relative to the EMIF to establish a clear framework allowing for consistent determination of indigency. So pretty broad. I know there's language that's been shopped around, but didn't want to, as I said in the email, didn't want to jump the gun and put anything in there ahead of you all. So the first action item is consider amending the definition of indigency. So
Yeah, and
I'll
I'll
open
jump
it up
in.
there.
I know our office has talked about this some and worked with all of you on this. And there's a couple points. We wanted to make sure it was clear that this work and this definition was unique to the EMIF for the purposes of this task force, just understanding that there's a lot of other work that would go into a larger statute-wide definition. So that's one thought I wanted to make clear. Second, for the purposes of the task force, we feel like the recommendation is to consider amending the definition that establishes the clear framework. So to us, that would mean some sort of an income threshold or a program that it's tied to, whether that's, SNAP benefits. But in our work with talking with the AOC specifically, it felt like that language wasn't going to become concrete in time for this task force meeting today. And so we would propose that the final determination on what that exact language looks like and what that definition looks like can be worked out through the legislative process. So the recommendation covers that the General Assembly should consider amending it and have a clear framework for allowing determination, and that the actual statutory definition can be included in the legislative process going into session.
This is John Gleason. The only thing I would add, and this kind of applies to all of them, and this may be just me being a little nitpicky, but do we want to keep them worded the way they are, or do we want them to be more forceful, since there are actual recommendations? Instead of saying, consider amending the definition, we say, we recommend that the definition be amended.
Yeah, this is Bo. Yes, I think we should be more, that the language should be more clear of what the task force is asking, and that we recommend that the General Assembly amend the definition of indigency, et cetera, et cetera.
It does say at the top that we gave a positive recommendation for these.
Introductory sentence.
The introductory sentence says they're given a positive recommendation.
And I agree. I just don't think we want the General Assembly to consider amending. I think we want the General Assembly to amend.
I agree with that, and also, I'm a little bit, I would be more comfortable, I think, if we had a little less vague recommendation. Are we just going to throw it out there to the legislature during the legislative process to determine what that definition is, or are we going to have, I'd like us to at least have a starting point.
I think we have, this is Grant Minshew, Chair Lady, and we do have a starting point. Our office's perspective is that there should be some threshold in the definition and statute. Whether that's the 150% of federal poverty guideline or the 185%, we don't have as strong of a policy opinion there. But if we want to, over the next several weeks, move forward with trying to make that decision on what threshold that might be, that's something that we could take on. I think the thought and, I think we just want to ask the task force that keeping some flexibility in the recommendations can help in the drafting of whatever language might be proposed going into session. And then, of course, the normal collaboration, through the drafting process and proposal of the bill and the committee process can and hammer out some of those final details.
This is Michelle Consiglio Young with the AOC and Chairman Hazelwood. So we've been working on trying to get, formulate some draft of this. But as we were going through it, as we were talking with the administration, the governor's office and safety and judges and others, it became pretty clear quickly that, there's a lot that needs to go into this, and the month that we had to get it solidified just wasn't quite enough. So we thought, between now and, before January, get with everybody, obviously sit down with you and Senator Watson as well, and make sure that everyone's on the same page with what you want in the definition, but also to make it doable, in practice, because, you want to fit something that's going to be effective in there. And when Charlie and I were going through it, and we were looking at the different, whether you use SNAP benefits or any other threshold, they all were conflicting on the percentage of the poverty guidelines. And so we didn't want to come into this with it already internally conflicting the language. So what we started to do is look at our Uniform Civil Affidavit of Indigency, which lays out a lot more specific requirements of what is when your determination of indigency on the civil side, which is much different than the criminal side, but it may be more akin to what you're looking for in this particular situation, circumstance type of cases, which is what Grant had said, to keep it narrow to the EMIF, part at point of where you're at, and then you can add more specifics into the code by going into that 5510 419 and putting in what you really want to see. And an income threshold is fine, that you can definitely add that, but you kind of have to pick which direction, because if you have several of those benchmarks that were discussed before, the SNAP, disability, all that, they have different percentages, of that poverty guideline threshold. So bottom line is it became more complicated. So there needs to be a little bit more discussion and floating before the actual definition is, proposed for you all.
And I'm not advocating that we today come up with that definition. I am advocating that before January, there is something that is a lot more definitive that we're proposing, rather than, throwing it out to 132 members to come up with their definition. So.
Yes, ma'am. Agreed.
Totally agree.
Great.
This is John Gleason. Do we then want to add an additional recommendation that says that the AOC will continue working with task force stakeholders, the administration and the General Assembly to get to that point?
That's up to you all, because we'll do that regardless. So
Sure.
it's up to you, whether you want to put it in there or not.
Or do we want to amend that first recommendation to at least list the types of things that we're considering incorporating into that definition?
Well, this is Bo. Again, if you can go back to the statutory language and see what the task force was asked to do relative to the indigency question. And when I read it, it says the task force shall study at a minimum the current definition of indigency and propose changes to the definition in state law. So however we answer that question, with this recommendation is really, and I don't know that this answers that question or meets that standard.
And I've switched it to my screen sharing. I'm gonna amend while we're all talking so everyone can see it. So that's why we switched the screens, but go ahead.
Well, I just think, I want to make sure that the report aligns with the statutory request that the task force had. And the two probably most important jobs this task force had was, number one, defining what indigency is and being sure that it's consistently applied across the state. And the second was, how are we going to pay for all this? I think this is before the task force for those two specific reasons. And so our report ought to at least address and make sure we're addressing those. And if everybody believes number one addresses that, then okay. But I think we did a little bit more work on indigency defining than what number one says. But certainly we can, if you can tweak the language to say that, the task force recommends, a change, obviously recommends a change to the definition of indigency. However, the task force recognizes that there is conflicting language in the statutes which needs to be addressed, and that this will be taken up when the General Assembly considers legislation or whatever, something like that. So that somebody looking at the report can see that we answered the question that the General Assembly asked us to answer.
Yeah, that's up to the committee. Whatever you all want to do, I'll change here as that's the point of today, is to go through this, add whatever you all want added, change whatever you all want changed. So
I move that we amend the first recommendation to something along the lines of what Chairman Watson just said.
Okay. Any other discussion? Everybody?
Word for word, but
So y'all give me some language ideas, because we'll have to vote on it today and approve it unless we want to meet again. So, or again, open for discussion. It's up to everyone on the committee if you
So-
want to do that or not. So
What are the main points that go into the definition that we're looking for? It's some sort of an income or programmatic threshold. What else? What are the other buckets there? Is that the main thing?
I mean, that's the main thing that you all were looking at, but also just, more specifics about, the income of the person.
Right.
More information, whether you want household information in there, just more specifics of how to get to that would be doable, for the court, but also get the information that you need to actually say, this person is indigent.
That's where we talk about household income, because somebody could really not work and their spouse couldn't work. And
so we could say the task force recommends amending the definition of indigency relative to the electronic monitoring indigency fund to establish a clear framework allowing for consistent determination of indigency by reviewing factors such as income requirements and or program thresholds. Or income thresholds and or program requirements, and then we could add the provision that Chairman Watson mentioned. However, the task force recognizes that there are conflicting items in statute that need to be further discussed or further rectified or further, what's the word for? Yeah,
Yeah, and you can say, within the time frame that the task force had to operate, we realized that this would take longer than time we had available to us, or something in that space.
So such as income threshold,
and our program,
is income threshold, and what were the other ones?
program requirements. That's if we decide to tie it to some other program. I guess it's the option to do that.
Right.
Yeah,
way to
that,
phrase it.
that would
I know
seem
where
like
you're
the
getting at,
course
but
programs.
yeah, I mean, it's
Oh.
income, household considerations, just other, expenses. I think you could, that encompasses a lot. I mean, and then the threshold really encompasses all of that, because that's not only looking at, if you want to have a minimum, amount that someone's paying, but also the threshold of the percentage of the poverty guidelines. I mean, that's going to encompass that.
So by reviewing factors such as income thresholds, household considerations, do you want to keep it at those two or add? We think that kind of captures two.
Yeah, well, I think you could say and others, and then semicolon, however.
Yeah.
The task force recognized that there's, I'm free thinking here, but the task force recognized there needs to be additional study of these factors before a final determination can be recommended.
Before a final determination and language can be drafted.
Yeah, something like that.
That works.
But for me, the biggest takeaway from this is not really the factors. The biggest takeaway from the task force on this, for me, has been the inconsistent application of the definition. So even if we put in a new definition, I think there has to be language that to where the judiciary consistently applies the definition, that we can, if we put a definition in, then the judiciary has no obligation to apply it, then there has to be a consequence to that. That may be a later discussion for legislation and how things do or do not get paid, or who ends up paying for it if they don't apply the definition. But I was surprised during the task force discussion that the judiciary indiscriminately decides what they think the definition of indigency is, and that needs to be fixed as much as the definition needs to be fixed. Or they need to pay for them when they give someone who's not indigent access to the indigency fund.
Chairman Watson, so this is Michelle. I think if you add in the more specifics into the code, it will fix some of that, because the way that it's in the code now is pretty vague. It's basically just, do they have the ability to pay? So I think when you go in and you put in more of a framework, some of that's going to fix itself. But we hear you, we understand, to get the judiciary to know, first of all, that they have to do this, and to second of all, implement it. And that will come with us, making sure we get that out to the judiciary and educate them. And I think it will fix itself on the back end.
Okay.
So do we want to keep this sentence in though, recognizing that, or no? Or is it kind of explained in the former where it says allowing for consistent determination?
I think by virtue of saying the task force recognizes that the need for additional study of these factors before final determination language can be proposed probably covers that, because we're acknowledging that we're going to have to look at all these different factors, and when looking at that, it's going to bring in the discrepancies that exist in the code. I don't know that you have to restate that. That's almost a rationale of why we're not ready to make a full presentation.
Do we want to add anything about that? Or maybe this is a separate bullet point, that we wanted to make sure that it was clear that other evidence to the contrary could be introduced during those hearings.
I guess that's what I figured. And sorry, this is Alex McVeigh from the General Sessions Conference. I guess that's the household considerations is kind of what I was envisioning that to encompass, or whatever. And that might be questions about debts, question about age of children, in addition to this number of children, questions about, if child is paying, rent, that should be included as income for the parent potentially that will be on the interlock device. So to me, I think, but I mean, if you want to get more specific, but that's what I was envisioning with that term, household considerations. So maybe that's not clear.
I think Patsy, I'll yield.
I was just going to say, I spent a few hours in General Sessions Court with Judges McVeigh and Statham, and one of the things that was, I can't even remember, one of them pointed out to me that in the household questions, you may have people who are living, if you ask how many people in your household or in your home, there might be 10, but they might all be independent livers, just, renting together. So I think, to Judge McVeigh's point, these questions about the household, I think, digging down into that, but that language should give the ability to do that. Whether or not we need to be more directive is another question.
Yeah, I do think that falls in under the additional study of factors, because we say household consideration and other factors. And I think those specifics certainly have to be addressed by the legislature as it tries to get a more clear definition, but I don't know that we have to list those in this document. Well, I would move a positive recommendation on number 1.
First and second, anybody?
Second.
Great. All in favor?
Aye.
All right, we'll move on to number 2.
All right, as you can see, I've already changed the word consider to require, but we can go back with that. I just was trying to track what we were talking about. So the first one, as I sent out, was consider requiring that any DUI offender receiving assistance through the EMIF be required to pay a portion of the monthly fees for ignition interlock devices. We can go back to consider, we can keep it at requiring, but just.
Should it say require if we're just gonna say?
Oh, yes, yeah.
And I would,
Good with require, and I also wonder if we need to set a minimum.
yeah, we had previously discussed $1 a day. About $30 a month.
We talked about this a little bit internally, and, I guess the thought process being, if the process for determining indigency is inherently for the purpose of, say, stating that somebody can't afford to cover the device, then it seems to make sense that if you want this kind of skin in the game clause, as we'd say it, it should be at a level that is not detrimental to that person's family or takes away from them feeding their family or anything like that. So I think in our opinion, either you have maybe like a waiver or some sort of a clause, or just make the minimum small enough that it's, doesn't risk, $30 a month is not insignificant across the course of the year.
Do we just want to say a minimum to be set by the judge?
I don't know. What are our folks in the
Payment?
judiciary?
For payment plans, when we did that bill a couple years ago for people who were, trying to set up payment plans for court filings cost owed, it's, discretionary at the judge that they set it based on what that person can afford. Whether it be $5 or whether it be, they could pay $100. So just for reference, there are some we also have other payment plans within our department that do have a minimum monthly payment. So you can go, there's precedent for either way.
And I understand like the need to have some sort of, quote unquote, skin in the game for the offender to, make sure that there is some level of ownership on their part as well. So I guess I would just maybe ask the folks in the judiciary to help us understand how this might work in practice. And that's the one.
Could be required by the court, court shall require to pay a portion. So it's clear that it's up on us to require them to pay a portion.
And as I said before, I know the lowest I go on these is $20. I don't go any lower than that. So, but that's just personal. I know on the court cost payment plans, I would have done $10 in the past, but $20 is the lowest. I mean, I've never had someone come back and tell me they weren't able to feed their family that week, that month with the $20. But again, that's purely kind of anecdotal.
Oh, well, that's good.
I think it would be better not to put them out, but to make it clear that the court
Shall
require.
some
Yeah,
portion. Yeah. And then also at the end, regardless of the indigency determination, because again, I don't want folks to read this and say, well, I'm finding them indigent, so I don't need to apply the first segment of that sentence. It needs to be regardless of what we determine on that hearing on the back end.
And then maybe that's second.
Yeah. Just required that the court shall require is weird.
Yeah, require that the court shall order.
Recommend.
Or
They just recommend that the court shall require.
We go.
And then we've got required again on the second sentence.
Just two.
To pay.
This is John Gleason. Also, do we want this to be? Because currently this recommendation is limited to DUI offenders with interlock devices. Do we not want this to apply to all offenders with an eligible offense under the EMIF?
Will you all have a separate recommendation that you want to split the fund and treat it separately? So that's why I was trying to.
Yeah, I would still think we would want the other offenders to have skin in the game as well, not just the DUI offenders using.
Right, you could put,
Any offender, it doesn't have to be
Within the context.
Yeah.
Or
for the devices. Devices covered by the fund. How's that?
Yep.
motion to approve number 2.
Got a motion, got a second. Got a second for number 2. All right, got a second. All in favor?
I,
Any opposed? All right, let's move on to number 3.
All right. I think that first one was probably the most time consuming, so hopefully the rest aren't as bad. Number 3, consider whether and to what extent local governments should be required to pay for portions of activities related to the EMIF.
now, remind me exactly how, because I know our county opted in. And so is that a similar?
So, yeah, there was the conversation of, and again, all of these recommendations can come out if the group wants it, or they can stay in. So remember, I was just taking notes based on what you all said in the last meeting. So, this is that keep a stake in the game kind of thing. If you have locals that aren't, or the courts that aren't penalized for issuing indigency a lot, then maybe if they have to have some skin in the game, have some budgetary concerns in the game, that they may be more open to sticking with the indigency definition and guidelines and not just issuing it to anyone and everyone and actually keeping people to where they have to pay a portion of it. So that was the conversation that was had.
Well, the AOC tells us that if we tighten up the definition of indigency, that much of this problem that you just alluded to will go away because the court will then more appropriately enforce the definition of indigency that we provided to them. Is that right, Michelle?
Yeah, I mean, that's right. You could probably take this out, or this is just to consider whether local government should, whether it may be outside, even beyond, just the court, but the county, any portion of that. And really that probably will take a little bit more discussion with your, local clerks and some others, your county officials and whatnot. But on the point of the indigency, when it combines with this, then if you're just thinking about that, then 3 is not necessary. But if you want to look beyond that then, you could leave it and explore that more between now and January.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I would move this down and in the report, after the recommendations, we might list this as other considerations that is, and perhaps one that we adopt, but it is something that we talked about. So later in the report, maybe if there's some things that we choose to take out of this, we say other considerations that, the General Assembly might look at and then we can list those.
Good idea.
Okay. I'll clean that language up as we're going, but. Would say none of this is all just draft language, so no. If you all just approve the final report and I have it down here, then it's fine. So none of these have been voted on, so they don't have to be.
And Grant, you said that at least the proposed plan potential idea that we talked about last time with the grant program, that still had a matching component to some degree, right?
I think that's a good example of why her recommendations 4, 5, and 6, you leave them relatively vague to make sure that as you're setting up these programs within the executive branch as opposed to the treasury, that you can kind of figure out some of those specific details. I think the idea is that it would work potentially like the mental health trust transport fund, is that what's where you have a defined allocation for each county and that they basically can access that amount of funding and assistance from the state however they see fit. But again, these are just very kind of general ideas of how that might work. If there's an appetite to bifurcate the fund, kind of leave the ignition interlock piece relatively the same as how it currently operates, but have the non-interlock piece be maybe treated differently, then that was our best idea of how that might work. But to that question, you're essentially asking the local governments to, here's what you have. You should supplement it, or maybe there's a matching component. Takes away the claims process essentially.
Do we want to move to number 3 or I guess, is everyone comfortable with this here?
Yes.
Yeah, I would just leave that there. We can come back to it when you get to the end of the report.
All right, number 3, consider separating the existing EMIF into 2 distinct funds, one fund for ignition interlock devices and one fund for other non-ignition interlock monitoring devices. And consider relocating the funds to other agencies within the executive branch.
So again, I think we need to say, at least in the beginning, separating. Or that, that we recommend that the funds be separated, just to drop the consider.
Separate.
The way this is written, it just basically says we just kick this can down the road. So I think we need to at least recommend or have some ideas about, what the task force believes would be the best solution to this, rather than just somebody the General Assembly should consider. Again, it seems to me that we've not really done much in terms of meeting our goal if we do that, if we leave it that way.
All right, so I've changed it to separate. I need to put it, separate the existing.
Well, I mean, I took to Chairman Hazelwood's point, it would be, we recommend that we
Separate.
separate. Mhm. Or And do we recommend that?
I would propose if we're considering the second part about relocating funds to other agencies within the executive branch, I would suggest that being the leading part of this recommendation, just because if we don't move them, but we keep them both where they currently are housed in Treasury, it is one fund, but then we, keep them separate and account for them separately. But if they were to not move and we kept them, I don't know what separating them into two distinct funds would really do, other than make some accounting administrative work for our team. I mean, we break them out already and we can provide, so I don't know what the benefits of separating the two into distinct funds if we don't move them.
I think, this is John Gleason. I think the benefit of that is further down in our recommendations, we are potentially going to recommend that the funding sources change. So I think that's why we want them separate, because if what is further down is adopted in some form or fashion, we would be recommending that interlock be a recurring appropriation, and the other technologies would be the potential grant program that we've discussed. So I think that's why we.
So could we then move this one below that one? I just don't want this.
Yeah.
I don't want this to feel like it's a higher priority than than the other one, if that makes sense.
Yeah, this is both. If we're going to recommend that there be a direct appropriation to this, I would like to move that up in the listing of the recommendations to, right after the number 2 that we've done.
So I move that we tabled the discussion on this until we take up what was number 5 and is now number 4.
Well, yeah, take up number 4. Yeah, I would like to take number 4, funding the ignition interlock component through a recurring appropriation. If we're going to recommend that, I think that's a really high priority. It needs to go higher up, right after the first 2.
All right, so I'm guessing we don't want consider either.
No, we would recommend.
Recommend funding. What did I just? Okay.
And previously, when we had discussed this being a recurring appropriation, we had discussed how it would potentially be calculated. Did we want to include any of those components, or do we want to leave that entirely up to revenue and F&A to figure out?
Well, also, I guess there's a question, Chairman Watson and Chairman Hazelwood, it doesn't necessarily have to be recurring, does it? It could be a non-recurring appropriation that covers the fund. That's y'all's world more than mine, so. I think the intent is to get away from the fee-based revenue stream and make sure that we're not having to come back every year and make it whole.
Right, no, I mean, technically, anything we fund is.
Non-recurring.
So I mean, we could say, you know, that we recommend funding the devices.
Just through an appropriate.
Through an appropriation, and let the legislature or let us decide whether we want it to be recurring or non-recurring. And I would say funding the internet devices in part or in whole, so that there's not a commitment that we have to necessarily pay the whole thing if we're still using some of the fee collection. However, I don't know if that language works right, but something
It
like it
does.
puts it clear that we're not necessarily paying for all of it if we're still getting the fees.
Does the word component need to be by the word devices? Funding the interlock device component.
So, yeah.
Do we want to mention anything like population, pretrial population, DUI rate, poverty rate, or do we want to leave that open to?
But where?
Well, previously, when we had discussed this funding, we had talked about how we would calculate that funding, and we had talked about a variety of factors. I didn't know if we wanted to mention any of those factors, if we would just want to leave it open.
I think that we leave a little wiggle room there by saying we're not necessarily going to fund it all or in whole or in part. And that gives us some space to work in, I think.
Motion to approve number 3. That's on the screen.
3 on the
Second.
screen.
So move.
Right. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. All right. Moving from 3 on the screen to number 4.
Well, should we move 5 up to 4, the non-ignition interlock, so that we discuss
Keep them together.
All right.
together? Yeah.
Doing a little tweaking here.
Bear with me. I'm not great at technology, so y'all just get to watch all my mistakes happen today when it comes to writing. All right. Number 4, consider supporting non-ignition interlock monitoring activities through a grant program administered by the executive branch.
That would be recommend.
Yep. Does that need to be funding and not supporting?
Yeah.
This can be devices and not activities.
And I thought this point would maybe perhaps be a good time to talk about the rate at which those are funded. Currently in statute, we have $200, and the people that came and talked last time sent information that said that was too low.
Of course they did.
Yeah, well, yeah.
And to that point, our county owns the own equipment.
Some counties.
Some other counties may, and they do it, I think, with like 125 a month, so.
There you go.
I don't,
I just didn't know.
I'm not disputing.
I'm not disputing that it's gonna cost a private company to do that. But
I just didn't know if we wanted to talk about the information that was sent in or not.
I will say that again, these are recommendations, so obviously there has to be a bill that gets filed, which
Yeah.
I will say 100% sure there will be a lot of discussion when it starts going through committee. So it's also something that can come up in those discussions. So, but again, we can also add something in. So just a reminder that this is not concrete.
Right.
Well, I would not support a recommendation of a number that's a different number at this point. Perhaps as the bill, as a piece of legislation moves, we can discuss that. But at this point, I would not be comfortable supporting a recommendation to do that.
I was thinking more along the lines of we would have something in there that said that the General Assembly and or the executive branch would look at the cost of using the technology. So that we would be finding out if our numbers match or if they don't. Not that we increase it, but that we look into what the actual cost is.
Well, I would offer, if that's important to the group, I would offer that would be down below the recommendation as a consideration. That the General Assembly or the executive or whomever may want to evaluate the current, cost or cost effectiveness or whatever of the current payment system or whatever the terminology would be.
Current reimbursement.
Yeah, whatever it is.
I agree with that because I think that's going to be part of the discussion process as this legislation moves through.
Monitor, fund.
To provide monitoring devices to indigent offenders.
To provide non-ignition interlock.
Yeah.
Devices.
Well,
I think it's both.
I mean, at least that one that corresponds.
Well, we already have the 125 that y'all have in rule and that seems to be working.
Yeah, we increased that in 2020. We can't go any more than 200 and we just increased it 125 per month, 175 per install at the request of the manufacturers. So
you're saying you have already recently reviewed the costs associated with the interlock device and you don't think that needs to be in?
we updated those costs to reflect the industry standards back in 2020. So, but it is, we handle that process through our rules.
Okay, so it should say may want to evaluate and research.
That works.
All right. Review the new number 4 on the screen. Feedback?
Move adoption.
Second.
Great. All in favor?
Aye.
Great. Any opposed? Thank you. All right. Moving on to number 5 on the screen.
All right, this is the one we were tabled for a little bit. I think we've got the first part set where everyone wants, and we were considering this second part and what to do with it.
Given the 3 and 4, help me, how is this not addressed in?
Yeah.
We
3
almost have to do it now.
So are you saying remove it because it's already addressed or remove it separate?
Well,
Recommendation.
I mean, you're moving, go back up to 4 so I can read it again. I mean, we're moving that to the executive branch, program administered by the executive branch. So have we taken care of this with 3 and 4, or am I missing something here? I'll ask Treasury, am I missing something here?
Sorry, gotta get unmute. No, I don't think so. I feel like it's stated above. I don't know that we need to restate it here.
Yeah, I don't think it says, but should 5 go above Or because we're recommending they be split.
That's the funding sources for the two different devices and then 5. recommend splitting them. But even has to range from both of them.
Yeah, it either needs to go in, I agree, in front of both 3 and 4 or right behind.
Well, we'll have to, if we move it, we're gonna have to retake up our actions on 3 and 4 because they're already approved, which is fine.
Okay,
So
well, then leave it like that. That's fine.
Well, I think for me, the question is, yeah, if we take that sentence out,
Or go behind 5 is the only question I have. But I don't, oh, okay. That's just saying you're gonna have to separate them in order to do 3 and 4, basically.
I think y'all wanted the budget first.
Okay.
I want to go back to Treasury again. Treasury, is this, how do y'all read this?
The only thing that I'm concerned about with the way it's written now with 3, 4, and 5 together is we're recommending funding for the ignition interlock in 3. 4 is they move the non-ignition interlock, so that everything else to the executive branch. And then 5 is saying split the 2 funds. I don't see where we're now recommending the ignition interlock devices go to another, to an executive branch agency. Like, should we say, I hate to go back, but should 3, if we take that language out of 5, should we then put it in 3?
I guess the question is if everything is split and funded, is there a need to transfer still? Transferring the grant piece of it.
Right, because you're not gonna have 2 funds left within Treasury, is what you're stating, right?
That's not going to move Treasury to safety.
So yeah, because nothing explicitly moves it. So all we've done is talk about funding. Right now, it still would be housed in Treasury, just funded by different sources.
Could you just add administered by the executive branch at the end of the sentence on 5 to make it clear that the funding and the administration are both going there? That's what we're wanting to do.
Yeah, I think oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, Erica, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I think you took it out, but maybe we need to add back what you took out of number 5 and just maybe reword it some. Remember exactly what the language was. Yeah.
Grant, maybe if you all are still looking at this, that you want to put in there something like continue to consider
Yeah.
effective and a proper administration, something maybe a little bit more like
Yeah.
trying to figure it out still.
I think that came from comments from the task force that maybe this might be out of the jurisdiction of the treasurer and would more closely align with other programs and policies that are in this space. So this was just our attempt at, taking that feedback from the task force.
Yeah, listening to the group, is this one that we're actually ready that we're ready to recommend, or is this another one that we ought to say, hey, this needs additional study? And the General Assembly should look at this. Because whether it moves or it doesn't move, 3 and 4, we have it funded, which was one of the requests of one of the requirements of the statute. We may not be ready to recommend that they be separated into 2 distinct funds, and we may not be ready to recommend that they be actually relocated. That may be something that we ought to have further discussion on, and that might fall into the consideration part. Just to
getting a lot of head nods around the room. I will also say, because it was brought up that the interlock piece be transferred to safety. We've had a lot of internal conversations, and that would, if that were to happen, it definitely needs a lot more research and thought. So we definitely,
I would move, we move this to the bottom and make it something that the General Assembly needs to study, consider.
all of five or just the second
relocating,
part?
that one you highlighted.
I would move all of 5.
Second.
Pat, you jump in here, but
Second.
I would move all of 5 because I think there's a lot of, I mean, I'm not sure I have fully contemplated all of the consequences of making that decision.
Well, we have a second, so that
I got a first.
stops discussions on it
All right.
to move it. Or I guess we don't even have to have it for this, but there we go.
5 is now a 3 in other discussion or other topics to consider.
Let me rewrite this. Consider separating the existing. And consider, how's that?
I'm just more comfortable having it down there right now. I'm just not as comfortable. Maybe others are, but I'm just not as comfortable making it a recommendation.
We should consider, like, evaluating and researching, should consider whether it's,
That work?
you could do, should consider as well for number 2.
Yep.
Instead of may want to. Should consider evaluating and researching.
So what happens when you have too many attorneys in the room and everyone wants to have their input on how things go? So,
Yeah.
It's fun. All right.
Except now it should say evaluating.
Make a motion to allow
And
Elizabeth to go back after the fact.
If everyone will let me do a spell check and grammar check after the fact before I send it out for things that are or non-substantial, that would be really helpful, guys. So.
Yes.
All right.
All right, so back up.
All right. Okay. We've handled that one.
We're taking 5. All right, so we have a new number 5.
And this one again can come out or stay in since it's a little outside of the scope, but it was something you all wanted to consider, so I wanted to put it in here. This is consider allowing for court fines and costs for a DUI be paid in payment plans rather than the requirement if you paid in full before a driver's license reinstatement. And again, that could be something that maybe goes down to the consideration since it's a little outside of the scope, or it could stay here. So, or it could come out completely.
And again, just as kind of rationale for this suggestion, I mean, again, anecdotally, I'll tell you that so many folks even tend to stay out of all of the interlock, all of the restricted license, any of their driver's license, and they just give up because they believe they have to pay $4,000 of all DUI fees before they participate at all in any of this. So I guess the
Which is
thought,
true.
and so the thought, I think,
Yeah.
was to allow them again to start making some payments toward this while also potentially getting a restricted license or getting an interlock or getting their full license in the future.
And Senator Watson, you may already know this. They can be on the payment plan for a year, but once the year expires, they can no longer be on the payment plan and they lose their restricted license if it's not paid in full. They don't get their full or have a restricted, I should say. And that's why we thought it was important. It may be a consideration.
And we looked into it and we don't see a reason on the federal level or see any problems with federal funding on why that's in there. So we don't know why it's different.
Well, again, I would go back to Chairman Hazelwood's point. I'm fine with this. I don't know that I know all the consequences of it, but do we want to recommend this? There's a substantial difference between, us, consider it and recommending it. If there's not a negative consequence to doing it, again, I'm not as involved in the judiciary because I'm on a judiciary committee, but if there's not a negative consequence to doing this, then I think we should recommend it, but I'm gonna have to rely on others to tell me whether from the task force perspective, there's a negative consequence that should be considered before we make it a recommendation.
The only potential negative, which again, it's a weird one where the feds will not technically say that it would not be against federal regulations and therefore put road money in jeopardy until they see it in a bill and approve it. So like, that's the only negative is we won't get a concrete answer from them of this, if this would be problematic until then, but we've gotten preliminary information that it wouldn't be. So that would be the only caveat there is that they won't give us anything concrete, but that's kind of that's more finance related and not judiciary related.
Yeah.
From
And I would,
go ahead, Patsy.
I would just be with no consequence that we are, sure of. I would just really be in favor of a recommend here because I think that's a really high hill for some people to climb. We need everybody getting to work that we can get to work. You can't get to work if you can't drive. So I just think if we can make it easier, as long as we're keeping other people safe, and with these devices we are, then I would hope that this task force would recommend that change.
I ask a question how it would play out from safety standpoint. Would they just continue their restricted license until it was paid in full, or would they just revoke their license if they stopped paying?
So this is where, one, I would definitely recommend that it be a separate bill altogether. Just because you can only get a restricted license during your revocation period. So once that time is up, they would theoretically then be able to go into this alternative payment plan option that's similarly set up to what we did for court fines and costs for traffic and criminal stuff back in 19, which is a now new separate restricted license that has a whole different configuration. So it's a full license that is somewhat restricted. And so they'd have to come in, surrender the current one, and then be issued a new one. And we go through that process of they would get to keep it until the court sends us a notice of default or something.
But they would take off their interlock ostensibly because they filled that new requirement.
Assuming they did, yeah. So they'd have to turn in their current restricted license and then be issued a separate restricted license.
Or it could be that they didn't get their sign for like 6 months later, so they would still have their.
Well, interlock is just a code on the license, so it's not its own license. So we just put it on whatever license they're issued if it's still needed.
Okay.
But it is something we would have to, the language would have to be correct.
So
Yes.
are there costs for as far as the clerk's offices that would be affected?
Yeah, that's what I was just gonna say. To Chairman Watson's point of perhaps maybe just some consequences of this is you might want to put this into considerations just for the pure fact of getting with the local, county officials to see if it's going to impact their county budgets, because a lot of those court fines and fees go to the county. So you're going to probably want to check that. I mean, in practice, and in theory, it's not a problem to have payment plans, but it's where the money and the timing of them receiving it that might be the impact.
And systematically how it's done, when we did the payment plan bill back in 19, it required a lot of input from the county clerks because they were not super on board at first. So they would definitely need to.
Exactly. The county, just counties themselves, but also the court clerks. You definitely want to talk to them before putting any kind of concrete on this. Chairman Watson and Chairman Hazel are exactly right on that.
So it's up to y'all.
I mean, could we not split the baby and consider it, but move it to the bottom with the others? Or is that what you're saying, or is it?
Yeah, I mean, it's up to you all, but it sounds like it may just be more effective if you put it as a consideration rather than a definitive recommendation. Just to get more information and float it with the right entities.
So we have options of split the baby. If finance chairs want it to be in a recommendation, it could stay consider as a recommendation, or we could move it all together down to the considerations piece. So.
Well, And I have some language for your last paragraph. So I would say we're going to recommend that the General Assembly study all of these things that we're putting in considerations. I think Chairman Hazelwood and I both see the value of this, and we'll push to make it either in a new law, in a new bill, or in, part of this total rewrite. But I'm fine with it being down in the bottom part, because I'm going to make that a recommendation that we study all these things. Patsy, you weigh in, because you were the one, you wanted it as a recommendation stronger.
That's fine. All I'm trying to get to is that we look at it. Again, I don't see any big difference in that. It's still going to have to be considered by the whole General Assembly. But
yeah. And if you could, and I would, when you order these, I would actually move that one to number 1 of the considerations, so that when people look through the report, I think that is a really important funding mechanism. And so I think it can sit above the others. It doesn't, they're not necessarily in sequential order, but I just think bringing attention to that early is important.
All right, done.
All right. Back to a new number 5.
Chair Lady, did you have something?
I'm good.
Go back
So
to a new number.
I guess to be proper, to get correct, I would move that we make that a consideration. The one we just moved.
All in favor? Any
And-
opposed?
In that
Okay.
motion, as to the senator's point, that we make that the top consideration, the first listed.
Great. Great. Any opposed? All right, we'll go back to the new number 5. Consider line for court fund.
Yeah.
Oh, hang on, we gotta strike that one.
Yep, I was waiting to delete until we rearranged, so I didn't forget anything. Okay. Consider requiring periodic reporting on electronic monitoring indigency activities from relevant executive branch agencies and courts. This was something that came up whenever we were trying to look at potential outliers or make the courts feel like they could potentially be audited or reviewed. Again, it was something that just came up. I don't know if it's needed anymore or if it needs to be moved or removed, but this was something y'all wanted to discuss as a final recommendation. So here we go.
I mean, are not the two kind of, I guess, the audit one and that one maybe should be one, as far as the 2 separate, if that's the intent, was kind of the audit possibility to combine those. Just a thought.
Is there no reporting now? I mean,
Officially reporting, no, but there's statistics, that are kept by Treasury and through our general sessions data repository. So, I mean, technically, yes, there are numbers that we have that we've all circulated in prior meetings. I know Erica had a lot of those as well, from Treasury. So that in effect was your reporting, because the numbers are tracked by the 2 different entities. So.
But it's not all in one place in a report that someone could reference.
There's not a official report, but the counties all keep that information. And it's county by county anyway, it's going to be always a county by county report and.
Right, but I think the question is whether or not all of that data should be compiled into this says periodic report, whether that's annually or.
And it may not actually be effective to have this in here until the system that you put in the code, the definition and just how it's all organized is established. This is almost like a part 2, because before you need to get all of that in place, and then it's going to take a little bit for the data and numbers and any report to get basically compile that anyway. So naturally, it's going to be something that would be more a year or two out, but I don't know that and it's up to you all, but it seems like it's something that would be after everything's in place, that's decided and passed by the General Assembly, it would be essentially a part 2 to it later on.
Because I'm not really sure, this is just stating what electronic monitoring agency activities would include, because like we have tons of DUIs from Georgia
Right.
that have interlock activity, that some of them, are moving to Tennessee, but it's just so many variables of what are you trying to capture? And I don't know if that's going to be possible. Yeah.
And I guess from Erica and Charlie, who will be putting together some mammoth report, what are the thoughts? I mean, I just don't know, it's just a lot of sources that I think that we're gonna be having to go to, but I mean, maybe Erica can tell us they already have this and can be easily generated in some sort of cumulative report. I don't.
Yeah, I mean, like we said, we have statistics, we track claims, we track the vendors, the suppliers, the devices. I mean, we have that data, but yeah, like you said, we don't report that in any public forum anywhere on any type of regular basis. I guess I always ask, what's the reason for the reports, and then let's decide what are we trying to do, and then we'll figure out how to do it. So, if we are moving things around, that could completely change what that reporting requirement is. If we go to, if the non-interlock goes to this grant format, that would completely change this. So I don't know if it could be something just more general, where we recommend there be some type of oversight or auditing of the devices or the suppliers. I think that was kind of where a lot of this started. Was with the courts and the suppliers. I don't know if we could frame it into something more long-term that we're.
Always
think
move it into it. And sorry, go ahead, Chair Lady.
The issue, as I recall, and maybe I'm misremembering, but I think one of the reasons that I was wanting reporting is because of the huge differences in how this indigency is applied across the state, when you have some counties with huge numbers and some others who don't, take monies from the fund in any kind of appreciable amount. So I think just trying to get a handle on who is using, even after we change the rules, I think it will still be good. I would still want to know, it's the judiciary, have they responded to the rules change, and are some of these outliers, back within what we would consider the normal parameters?
Yeah, I think we need some kind of performance metric to know what we're doing and whether it's beyond just the fact of we're spending more money than we're funding it with. I think you could almost look at the questions that the task force was tasked with answering in the statute that created the task force as some of the things that obviously the General Assembly would be interested in. So if you go back to the original language of the statute that says, here's what y'all need to be looking at, this is some of the data that you might look at as part of a annual or semi-annual or whatever report.
Could you take out the word activities and put the word fund? So it's like not so.
But funded devices.
How about consider requiring periodic reporting on the electronic monitoring indigency program? Does that work?
And if it stays at consider, it's broad enough that.
Well, I would say if we're going to keep it up in this section, it would be recommend requiring periodic reporting on electronic monitoring indigency program from the relevant branch agencies and such. And then the legislature can spell out in statute what that reporting would include.
Can I ask a question, Senator Watson, Representative Hazelwood? Are y'all interested in the number of interlock devices actually being used, regardless if they are? I mean, one reason, that some county might have a low numbers because they're actually not following the law and order in the devices aren't going on anyone's car. Somebody's actually driving illegally. Are we wanting just to know about the devices connected to the fund? Or are you wanting to know about, interlock use in total and in general? And I guess it's just the fund if we're pulling the numbers from Treasury are we wanting to get numbers from any of the providers, maybe separate from the fund? Or are we just worried about the fund? So that's the only numbers that we need.
I think back to Michelle's point, it kind of depends on where the plane lands to me.
All of that other information is stuff we collect and get from the providers currently and provide for anyone who asks. So that information is there from our department, but it's separate than the fund stuff. So
I think relative to the statute that this task force was established under, we're looking at the interlock indigency fund. And so I think the recommendation would really be, because that's where we were seeing our, physical challenges and the inability to pay for it. So that's why I think there's some level of a performance metric that we want relative to how this fund is performing and how it's being utilized by the judiciary is how I'm looking at this particular recommendation.
Would it not about have to come from Treasury though, the report, rather than from the courts? Because they would know exactly what the funds paid and not.
And Erica, this is information you all have, right? I mean, we've seen to an extent, because we've had that come through before. So, it just seems right that the court system wouldn't have that because we don't administer the fund. It obviously goes through Treasury, but I know that you all have a lot of that information. I guess it's just to the extent of how that would be compiled, perhaps.
Right. So we have the information on and we've provided in these previous meetings in regards to how much is paid to which counties, the types of devices we're paying for. We can provide the information we have been providing just in relative just to the indigency fund, right? And the payments made from it.
what about this? Fund program from relevant agencies, including but not limited to the executive branch agencies, the treasurer's office, and the courts.
And I guess my Michelle's point to or just Statham's is general sessions courts not being courts of record in Tennessee. I'm just wondering it would be, I guess, more maybe even the clerk's office getting and pulling it out of. I'm just curious. I'm like thinking of some rural courts literally not having scanned documents or anything. Got their first computer a few years ago. I'm just I don't know.
I don't know that the courts would provide any report. We wouldn't have any ability.
Can we just recommend requiring periodic reporting on the electronic monitoring indigency fund program, period, and let the legislature wrestle with what that means?
Amazing idea. We can do whatever you guys want.
Well, just others look at that and say, that gets to the point that we're recommending some kind of report. We're not sure at this stage from a task force perspective what that report would look like or what information will be contained. But when the legislature gets this, they'll know, okay, we got to figure out what do we want this report to say, and we can have that, we can hash that out in the body rather than trying to hash it out here. But the point is, we think there needs to be some kind of report.
How about
So-
this?
Adoption of a number 5.
Second.
Good deal. All in favor? Any opposed? All right. We'll drop down to number 6.
All right, consider, similar to the one above, consider whether the comptroller may wish to conduct an audit of courts that are outliers for the use of the ignition interlock devices component of the fund.
I think we need to drop that last clause. It should be all or nothing, not just
Yeah,
interlock.
yeah, because we
Of
put
the
that.
courts, period. Is that what you're saying?
We're just saying we should strike for the use of the ignition interlock devices component of the
Yeah.
fund.
Because y'all included it above that you want it to be anything included in the fund, whether or not.
So should we say about the EMIF?
Yeah.
And then also, I think if we are making this recommendation, it needs to be, more direct. We need to say that we recommend that the comptroller does audit.
Well, Chairman Hazelwood, that'll probably require the comptroller to hire 25 additional people.
Yes, have a very large fiscal note attached.
Jason, if you're listening to the call, I just threw that in. For fun.
I mean, unless you want to, because technically they audit counties.
Yeah.
You may want to, and the courts would be more
If
within.
it's a
the
sessions
county,
court, it's a county
but it's
court, so
the
it's not,
county.
you're not, auditing state, I guess, courts necessarily. but-
Yeah.
They need to say,
And they have the ability to do that anyway. They can go in. So that may help on the fiscal side, since they do that, that it may be within the duties they already perform. If you just expand that, to
So,
counties.
but
does it need to be of counties?
courts of record are also
They
signing these too, though.
They do, yeah.
So it could be of counties or state courts.
I remember the conversation basically being that the comptroller, if there are the major outliers, then they can look at it, see what's happening. That, not that we're necessarily asking the comptroller to do an annual audit,
Right.
just cause that it's the ability to use our reports that we are recommending in number 5 to kind of,
Audit a few.
Unless you
that's
just
how,
say,
that's how I remember the conversation. at least.
yeah, for them to audit, I mean, the comptroller to audit the use of that fund, and then they can decide the manner which.
Right, maybe take out the word courts.
Okay, so
Audit the use of the
Recommend-
fund.
Yeah, so, and that's what they do.
recommend the comptroller.
Granting the comptroller the authority to audit.
The use of the EMIF.
Probably already have. it.
Yeah, I don't know that it's authority, they. have
Yeah, they
that.
already have that. Recommend requiring the comptroller audit the use of the electronic monitoring. Fix that in a second.
Or just recommend that the comptroller audit, maybe you don't need to. Just to make it simple.
Yeah, I don't think you need recommend require. I think just
Yeah.
recommend comptroller audit.
Okay, what if we stop it at that? Also, indigency is not a word in,
It is
so
not, yeah.
it is super fun to add that to my definition every time I have a new computer. It is a word we have created in the state.
Motion to approve number 6.
Second. Okay, second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. 6 is there. Lucky number 7, here we are.
All right, this was something that came from, again, one of these conversations up here on these recommendations. So consider implementing a process to deny reimbursements to courts that may have ordered indigency when it was not appropriate.
The courts aren't paying the money anyway.
Yeah, it's the
Yeah.
vendors that get the reimbursement.
You pretty much encompass this on the previous recommendations and your checks and your audits and your reporting. I mean, you're going to capture this. And then if they're not properly using it, that can be handled within the language that this legislature ends up approving on how it should actually all be utilized.
Yeah, I agree. We might move this down to the bottom. I just want to make sure that the legislature contemplates this in any legislation. And so rather than make it a recommendation, maybe make it, hey, you need to take this into consideration, that there needs to be some way of, some level of accountability when they're incorrectly or whatever, inappropriately applying the indigency fund. What do you think, Patsy?
I agree.
And it probably doesn't need to be for the
We
courts.
could change it to say the General Assembly should consider implementing a process to
Just
remediate
deny
bad
reimbursements.
Right.
Deny
Of
reimbursements.
the EMIF.
Right, take out the word to
Of
courts.
the EMIF.
Right.
Well, you wouldn't be reimbursing the fund, you'd be reimbursing the county.
Well, the reimbursements actually go to the vendors, not the courts.
It would be reimbursement for the electronic monitoring fund.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, I see what you're saying.
There we go.
Again, I am not great at grammar, so y'all just throw out things that need to be fixed. Now this needs to be changed up here.
Property funds, funds. Funds not being reimbursed.
Yeah,
From
the
Yeah,
entities
they're invoices
reimbursed.
that are paid. We're not really reimbursing. We're just paying the invoices.
Now, payment,
Payment of invoices.
payments from the electronic monitoring.
Do we need, I mean, we currently do deny payment of some invoices for various reasons. So do we need to specify the reason we're wanting to?
Well, that's why I suggest making it broader and just say that the General Assembly should consider implementing a process to, deal with the bad actors in the industry or in the program. That way the General Assembly can decide what kind of safeguards it wants to put into this program.
But are you saying that we already have that ability? We already deny, so.
Well, I mean, we deny for things like incomplete forms or expired court orders or.
It's not denied if they maybe give too many indigent, like they determine indigency too loosely or something.
Right, or if someone, a court said someone's indigent, but really they, we don't check to see if the person's actually indigent. We trust whatever the court says, right?
I mean, you want to establish a process of reviewing the reimbursements. I mean, that's essentially what you're wanting to do, right? I mean, and that
For accurate interpretation or use of.
for proper implementation of it. I mean, that's what you're wanting.
Would you say to implementing a process to review and deny, if appropriate, payment of invoices from the electronic monitoring fund? And then do you need to say based on ill-advised use of the fund or
Inappropriate use.
yeah, well, we put appropriate there. I was struggling for another word.
Inconsistent.
Like you're gonna be a court of appeals.
It's Treasury, the Court of
I know,
Appeals for the
that's-
general, I don't know, I'm just trying to, I don't really know.
And
where-
that's what the conversation was, is you need someone to do review on the back end, but then who does that? And then that conversation delved into, nobody wants to do it, so you gotta create it. And so, yeah. I think that's why it's now a consideration.
Would you say a process to review and deny payment of invoices for inappropriate application of the I'm wordsmithing here, but inappropriate application of the indigency
Determination.
Yeah,
determination.
Definition.
Something in that, because that's what we're really trying to get at is, hey, you're taking from the indigency fund and giving to people who aren't meeting the definition of indigency, and we're not going to pay it.
here again, Senator Watson, it's going to be like a court of appeals of our decision.
I guess you're just saying a judge isn't following the law.
Yeah.
The judge is, so I guess as politely as you can frame that, I don't know what I mean, that sounded all right how he said it, but
That's
have to
what
be
you're saying.
careful. You're just saying, how do we,
Or just a maybe review of, application of the law. I mean, maybe you want to leave it a little bit more so we don't get into a legal court issue, with it being something that could actually be a lawsuit for the judge, not
certainly a board complaint against the judge.
or a judicial conduct complaint type of thing. Because we know I know where you're going. I don't want it to get crossways with those other processes though and cause an issue on that end. But
Well, again, this is something that we're recommending for additional study. We're not making it a recommendation. So I think whatever language we can have in this that gets the point across that, hey, we need to figure out, how we can be sure that that we're getting that the judiciary is using the determination of indigency to the best of their ability, and they're not just making it up as they go along.
Should we then make it, maybe to make everyone a little bit more comfortable, the General Assembly should research into whether there should be a process, and then it's look into, I mean, now we're just playing word semantics, but
like Michelle said earlier, if you make the definition of indigency stronger, you could then see if the judges, I mean, right now, we don't have any considerations within the statute to,
there are no
prevention
benchmarks right now.
But is there anything wrong with Senator Watson's language though, just for a inappropriate application of inappropriate?
I'm comfortable with that because I think that really is something it's been a huge amount of discussion, and that's one of the big problems this task force, in my mind, is trying to solve. So I think, I'm not uncomfortable with having that there.
I mean, the answer might be the judge might be ignorant of the factors, and so the reason that it's that they're allowing it is because they don't even know. So I mean, that's what
Again, that this is something that we're recommending that the legislature study more, and we're also, it's a process to review, not just to deny. And so for that circumstance where there's an inappropriate application and there's a process of review and the judge says, I just didn't know that that's what the law was, then, okay, we're paying this invoice, but from this point forward, you should know what the law is. I think that's where we're trying to get with this.
I mean, unless you want to, encompass it where it's, consider implementing process for review of the just more generally, the application. Right, just to have it a little bit more, like, you're looking at the whole, I know, the inappropriate for sure, but just the whole application of the determination of indigency in general. I mean, that's.
I guess you could have people who were not using it when they could or should. So you could have that go both ways, I suppose.
Right. right?
So maybe take out the deny payment, not tie it to denying payment of invoices and just a review of
Right.
it overall to determine if someone is inappropriately applying.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly, because you could have several types of scenarios here, and maybe just not to, limit it to that, but to have an overall review of the application of that determination.
That's more.
Okay, I mean, I'm fine with that. I would suggest we can squeeze this a little tighter and just say the General Assembly should consider a process, because the General Assembly doesn't implement it. It'll be implemented by somebody else. But we should consider a process to review for inappropriate application, the determination of innocence with electronic monitoring. And then within that process, the General Assembly, could say, if you, XY violated XYZ times, then we'll deny payment or something like that. But I want to make sure that this is a consideration that we study. I move adoption. I like it.
Do you want to say
Second.
application? So it doesn't matter. It's
To review what or in.
Yeah, that's what are we reviewing? We probably need, if you can remove that that motion in second, we may need to put a noun of some sort of what we're actually reviewing. Like
Okay.
reviewing the EMIF
For how the law is applied, whether the determination of innocence is appropriately or inappropriately applied, that's the word application. Not
Did we
an
say claims there? That's technically what we're reviewing and making that determination is what we call a
General Assembly
claim.
should consider a process to review the electronic monitoring indigency program.
because they were saying there may be somewhere it may not be tied to a claim, it may be someone who should get it and isn't.
That's
So if we just say review of the entire program.
Yeah.
Well, I think from the legislative perspective of this task force, I'm looking at the determination of indigency and whether the judiciary is, once they know what that definition is, that they are appropriately applying the determination of indigency. And only folks who meet the definition as determined by the statute are given access to the electronic monitoring fund. And where that isn't happening, I think the legislature wants to have a process in place to say, hey, this is, if you're just claiming everyone is indigent, we're not going to pay all those. We're not going to pay those. They have to meet the definition of, so the key for me is determination of indigency.
So what about this, to where it's determination of indigency, but we put within this EMIF program?
Yeah. And that's,
Just a quick question to Erica. Erica, though, the forms, the indigency forms actually go to you all with the payment for reimbursement,
That's
correct?
correct. Yes.
So
that's
the
correct.
judge is having to either mark a lie or something on those forms because they are reviewed and denied if they're not indigent according to what's on there, correct?
There's an affidavit of indigency, right, that's submitted to us. So if that form's completed correctly, signed by the judge, clerk, then we accept it.
They don't review to see
Yeah,
if
they're
it's
not.
actually.
We don't know.
But
how
what
much
I'm
the person
saying
is.
is, if somebody put down they make $50,000 and it said $50,000 and I put they paid zero, you would kick that back, correct?
No.
No, we completely rely on the court to tell us, does this person qualify for
Because
indigency?
the form says on it like what the amount is that we have to follow for the 185%.
But if
So,
the judge
okay.
has marked them indigent, they're just reviewing if it's an allowable expense under the fund.
Okay. I didn't know that.
And I guess this recommendation, Senator Watson, if a certain judge is actually denying too many of these, saying people actually are not indigent when they are, there's one really tough judge that the governors or you guys see that is inappropriately, denying indigency funds, and this recommendation would also possibly
Capture that.
capture that.
Sure, I think it cuts both ways. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think there's a small, very small percentage of those people, but yeah,
Yeah.
possible. I move adoption of number 5.
Second.
All right. All in favor? Any opposed?
Okay, now we've gone through all the recommendations. I know Chairman Watson, you said that you wanted to tweak this language right here on
Yeah.
the considerations.
Yeah, so I would like to say something to the effect that the task force recommends that the General Assembly consider and whatever. This is an additional recommendation, but it's not a specific recommendation fund. It's just recommending that further study.
Yeah.
So task force recommends the General Assembly
Research and study.
further study or something like that, and then we list these things out. Recommends for additional study.
Yeah.
Recommend, so I'd say the task force recommends for additional study that the general, and that doesn't make sense either, does it?
I can just take out the other one, but back here, the task force recommends.
Yeah.
Recommends additional. How about research and study on? No, that's not working.
The task force recommends additional study by the General Assembly. Yeah.
The General Assembly.
Yeah, I think it needs to go back to how we had it. Recommend the General Assembly. Further,
Maybe like
Duh.
the additional.
there we go. Research and study. Yeah.
Is there a reason you need research in there?
Nope. Additional study on various topics.
Additional study on the following following considerations or the following items or something like that, and then colon.
Prior to legislative considerations. There we go. How's this? But we can also drop the prior to
Yeah, I think you just.
legislative consideration too.
Yeah, I would just say additional study on the following items.
Yeah.
We're getting somewhere, guys. Okay. All right, we have gone through all of the recommendations. Now, all of this information should be accurate.
I think we need to go back one of the consideration.
1 and 2 just recommend, just make them consistent, kind of switch.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say, but since
Recommend amendment.
we didn't technically vote on number 1, so that'll work. Recommend amending. I would say that's not substantive, so we don't need to re-vote on it. Okay, now up to here, I know Erica, you just sent me an email. We were gonna add in the numbers here. Let me pull up what you sent.
Yes, that the current volume of monthly claims and future projections was something we previously provided to the group, so I just added that back from what we'd sent previously. So we're just looking for the types of devices with that one, correct? Or do you
Well,
want
this
the
one, I think it's
number?
the number of, not types, so that may need to
Okay.
be.
Okay, I read that one wrong. I'll get that. I'll pull those numbers. I'll have to get.
But I'm gonna
those.
keep all of this here, and then we can
Okay.
just enter the numbers for these.
Is there a process where we could do this and then send it around virtually without having to reconvene to vote on the addition of these more data heavy points?
So I think legally and technically, no, because that would be to be able to vote and adopt and recommend the report has to be voted on in totality. So if we're adding stuff in that is not minor, like spelling and grammar, I think it would have to be done in person. If we want to go by like legally what is required. So that's where we may need to either put all this stuff in now, or I don't think I can send it around and get this is okay from all the task force members with substantive information changed in it. I could be wrong. Someone feel free to correct me. But I don't know if legally, according to the open records stuff, if we can do that.
I was gonna say, was that if the information had been previously provided, they can motion to just approve this section. What the information previously provided.
No, but I've got to enter it into the report because the report has to be voted on.
I understand.
To vote on the report, would we have to have a physical quorum? Or could we, could you send it out and then we have an electronic meeting to just approve?
I think the rules say that we can have an electronic meeting if the quorum is electronically, if we don't have enough people in person, if there is a necessity that can be shown and provided to the Secretary of State.
It's a statewide task force.
Yeah.
Under a deadline.
Right.
And then we'll submit that to the Secretary of State.
So we could definitely do a virtual one. And honestly, I'm not sure if this counts as a governing board anyways. So I'm gonna look into that. But yes, I think we can definitely do a virtual meeting to approve it finally, once I get this information from Treasurer's Office. And then everyone can review it one last time maybe and catch any other.
A little bit more comfortable with doing that when you have actually everything in front of you and you have a minute to, kind of go.
Yeah, I think that's the best course of action is that you guys get this now. Now everything, get it in its final form, and then let's have a very brief virtual meeting. Some may be able to come in person, and move the report and be done.
Okay. And I know it probably at least John, Travis, and Grant to be in person. So I think that would be enough, or we could do it all virtually. I think either way would be fine. But now that means we need to schedule that meeting.
Yep.
So everyone pull their calendars out.
How much notice do you have to give?
A week. It's sufficient notice. It's not defined.
Okay.
But as soon as we determine it today, depending on if I need to book a room or not, which I'm gonna say no, because that's gonna take more time. We can just hold it, like if anyone wants to show up, we can do it upstairs or maybe at the Capitol. So we'll tweak that, but.
Could we do it? Bo and I are gonna be in town for FSAG. Could we do it around that? And then
When
we
is
could
that?
actually be physically present. It's in a couple of weeks, right, Bo?
It is next Wednesday.
Okay.
21st.
Mhm.
That's,
Virtual, you have to be your virtual, it's just going virtual.
yeah, so you don't have to drive anyway.
Right, but
We can do it anytime. My day is fully open that day. Do you have anything, Captain? So.
I'll just have to hop on and vote. That's our judicial conference begins that morning.
Okay.
And I'm the president.
Oh, okay. Well, then let's tailor it around you. When would you?
Anything after it starts, just not like right at 8:45 when it's starting.
And honestly, it should be quick because I can get it out as soon as I get the data from Erica, so everyone can review it well in advance.
1 and 10.
How about 1 o'clock?
Because their thing may be later. So when do y'all get in town, Chairman and Chair Lady?
I'll be in town. I'm coming in the night before because I have something that morning. So I could do it anytime after, say, 10, between 10 and 1:30 Central. Central.
What would y'all want to do then?
Well, I could do, if they're doing it at 1 here, it's 2 there, so I'll be okay with that.
That work? What about Erica? Do you have any restrictions on that day?
Nope, the schedule's open that day, so whatever.
David's not on here, so we're gonna just assume he's good. I think that's everyone else. So if we
We
do.
it-
Okay.
If we do 1 o'clock, then it will have to be brief because the FSAC meeting starts at 1:30. So
I think that's a good idea, Patsy, to do it 1 o'clock and then that, we gotta
Yeah.
decide.
we got to get done.
Okay, 1 o'clock, Wednesday, the 21st, Central Time. I'm gonna send it out here in a minute, because I have to copy a whole bunch of people to send it, but I have it saved up on my computer, and you all will get it. And then as soon as I get that information from you all, Erica, I'll update it, and I'll do a final read through and send it out to everybody.
It'll be
And I'll let
either
y'all know
tonight or
where the
tomorrow. But I'll get it
in-person-
to you.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say it'll either be tonight or tomorrow, but I can get it. I'll get it to you as soon as I can.
And I'll set it up an in-person one. I'll see if this room is available again. Or do you all prefer it be somewhere over at Cordell?
Are you in the
We're in the
conference room?
tower. We're in the tower.
In the tower? Yeah,
Well, obviously, we want you to come to court hall.
The only thing is wherever it is, we'll need y'all to get a room so that we can record it. So that's the only caveat. So, but John said he can make that happen, so we can let John tell us where it's gonna be at 1 o'clock and I can update the calendar once John lets me know. Thank you so much for offering that.
Well,
All right, at Cordell Hall or Microsoft Teams to be determined where in Cordell, 1 o'clock next Wednesday.
Perfect.
Oh, wait, we still have other stuff on the agenda today, so hold tight.
All right. Let's see.
I think we're good there.
Yeah. Have we talked to the comment or, all right, any public comments? I know where our next steps are. Any comments from the public? I assume we had several dial in virtually.
I don't see anything in the chat from anyone wanting to
All right.
speak.
Again, thank everybody for their hard work. I can see everybody put a lot of thought into this, and I want to thank you all. And pretty unique seeing different perspectives come together and stuff. See how the wheels turn. So we all win with this, and it's what's great. So we can turn out a good work product. So I really want to thank you all. Elizabeth, thank you for your help. Thank you, everybody. Please, thank you. And
The motion.
yes.
Move to adjourn.
There we go.
All right, good second. All in favor?
Thank you.
Opposed? Thanks. Bye.
John, we'll just need to, and since it'll be small,